Hare Krishna. This is the 18th part of the Bhagavad Gita section of our Bhakti Shastri course. And today we're going to start chapter 9, which is a very important chapter. We've been building up through the first 6 chapters, through various types of yoga processes, and we finally reached the top of the yoga ladder at chapter 7. And through 7 and 8, we talked about different flavors of bhakti and different mixtures of different things. You have mixtures of bhakti for different purposes. You'd like to get X, Y, or Z out of it, or that the practice of bhakti mixed with other practices. And then in 7 and 8, there was made mention, but not extensively, this notion of kevala, ananya, there's different terminologies for it, pure, uttama bhakti, where there is no motive except for the service itself. It's an end in itself. And it simply depends upon the love of Krishna. Krishna has love for his devotees. And so it doesn't require great austerities. It doesn't require the ability to control to bring the mind back from the senses. It just depends on the fact that Krishna is our well-wishing friend, and if we wish to revive our relationship with him, he reacts in a positive way. So chapter 9 delves deeply into that particular topic. It talks only about that topic. It's going to give us the kind of the foundation for taking that process up, and give us some ideas on how to proceed with it. The middle 6 chapters, 7 through 12, are all about bhakti of the various types. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says it's the kind of the most precious part, and all the other acharyas say the most precious part of the Bhagavad Gita. The 6 chapters on the beginning and end, they say, are like protecting that very important part in the middle. Since there are 6 chapters in the middle, with an even number, you can't have a middle. But the way that they put it here is that this topic of pure bhakti, which is taken up here in chapter 9, it's so wonderful that it spills over into the beginning of chapter 10, where it's given. They're sometimes called the nutshell verses. It's 4 verses that summarize very succinctly. They're very concentrated verses that summarize this pure bhakti and explain how it works. So if you have an even number of things, it's the space in between 2 of them, the third and the fourth item, that would constitute the middle. So since this topic of pure bhakti kind of bridges 9 and 10, it says, so it's the middle, this very sweet middle of the middle, the precious middle of the Bhagavad Gita, the middle of the middle. Okay. So we're going to, because of the importance of this topic, it's the core message of the Gita. And Krishna will confirm that at the end as well. There's the famous verse at the end that where Krishna says, "Just surrender unto me," confirms this. And so we're going to take this more slowly than some of the previous chapters. And today we're going to, there's, what is it, I think 34 verses in this, in the low 30s in this, I think 34 in this chapter. And but we're only going to cover the first 10 today. So instead of maybe covering it in 2 sessions like we've done before, it'll be at least 3. We're going to move through a little bit more slowly and to savor this and consider it more deeply, because it is the heart and soul, the essence of the Gita. So we'll start here with the verse 1. In the first couple of verses, Krishna, he gives various, he explains the different aspects, or the different, he gives a description of this bhakti, the different things it does, the different things it constitutes. It's kind of a description of different characteristics of this pure bhakti. And then in the third verse, he talks about a prerequisite. It's really the only prerequisite that there is It's, at least it's I think it's fair to say it's the only one. It certainly is the most prominent one. And then further on in the rest of the section we're going to study today, it sets the foundation, gives the foundation for that prerequisite, which is faith. Okay? So we'll start out here, and Krishna says, it's Sri Bhagavan Uvacha idam te tu guhyatamam pravakshami anusuyave gyanam vigyana sahitam yagyatva mokshase shubat. And the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "My dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me, I shall impart to you this most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence." You'll notice the similar terminology here from the beginning of chapter 7, Jnana and Vijnana. In chapter 7, Prabhupada said that this was the phenomenal knowledge, things that you could see, and then things that were beyond the numinous, phenomenal and numinous types of knowledge, so getting at the essence of things. And here it's going to be used a little bit differently, but the general translation of Jnana and Vijnana is knowledge and realization, and that's what Prabhupada gives it here. But there's a specific meaning to those two things in this chapter. So let's take a look at. We're going to break it down into the various things mentioned here. So it's Guhya Tamam, the most confidential. Guhya means literally secret. And there's it's uttamam, or the highest, or the best, or the most. So the Prophet says the most confidential, or the most secret. It's it's the best, Pravakshami anasuyave, and so he says I'm speaking to someone who's not envious. And so we're getting a qualification here for understanding. Who can understand it? Who can take it up? Someone who's not envious. And Jnanam Vijnana, knowledge and realized knowledge. And Sahitam Yat Gyatva Mokshashe Ashubhat. So that with that knowledge, if you know that knowledge, you will be free from anything. It says this miserable material existence, Ashubhat, and anything inauspicious. Ashubhat. So it has these properties. And we'll look at how Prabhupada explains them. In order here. Guhya Tamam. So Prabhupada says in the purport, the very beginning of Bhagavad Gita, the first chapter, is more or less an introduction to the rest of the book. And in the second and third chapters, the spiritual knowledge described is called confidential. Topics discussed in the 7th and 8th chapters, the beginning of Bhakti, right, are specifically related to devotional service. And because they bring enlightenment in Krishna consciousness, they are called more confidential. But the matters which are described in the 9th chapter deal with unalloyed, pure devotion. Therefore, this is called the most confidential. So that's how he says. So he said, heard about the soul to begin with. That was confidential. So many people don't understand that. And then we started to hear about bhakti. But there was also various types of mixed things. So that was more confidential than just understanding the soul. But not as confidential as here, what's unalloyed pure devotion. We mentioned that the pure devotion produces something which the mixed devotion does not. It provides a much closer relationship with Krishna. That's what makes it the most confidential and the most important. So, pravakshami anasuyave, and Prabhupada says the Sanskrit word anasuyave in this verse is also very significant. Generally, the commentators, even if they are highly scholarly, are all envious of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even the most erudite scholars write on Bhagavad Gita very inaccurately. Because they are envious of Krishna, their commentaries are useless. That's from the purport. And then again he says, one who criticizes the character of Krishna without knowing him is a fool. So such commentaries should be very carefully avoided. And then he says, in contrast, for one who understands that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the pure and transcendental personality, these chapters will be very beneficial. So there's a qualification here for being able to understand the subject matter. And then Prabhupada says, the devotees are constantly engaged in the Supreme Lord's service. The Lord understands the mentality and sincerity of a particular living entity who is engaged in Krishna consciousness and gives him the intelligence to understand the science of Krishna and the association of devotees. So Prabhupada talks a lot about how everybody, basically in the material world, has this envy, to some degree, envy of the Lord. And so Krishna, we find out, is supremely powerful, and all others are, by comparison, infinitesimal and insignificant. And so almost everybody in the world has either some objection or have some level of discomfort with that particular situation. We have experience where if we are insignificant and somebody else is powerful, that oftentimes is not very good for us. We're abused, we're mistreated. We, ourselves, we want to be somebody. And so the notion of there being an all-powerful being who completely dwarfs us and makes us seem completely insignificant can be worrisome or downright aggravating. And so there's resistance. There's a kind of a deep psychological resistance to that notion. And that's what Prabhupada calls that envy. And so what happens is that Krishna respects our free will, and he reveals himself. He said in Prabhupada, he says he gives the person, Krishna gives a devotee the intelligence to understand the science of Krishna. So it says that understanding this is partially the prerogative of Krishna. And so Krishna, because he respects our free will, he thus only reveals himself to those who really desire it. He allows those who are envious, who don't want to have that situation obtain, that there is an all-powerful being and we're not that being at all, to remain in denial. That's how it works. That's why they can't understand. They don't wish to. They wish it not to be true. And so as long as we wish it not to be true, then Krishna will not force us to understand that it is. He'll respect our free will. This is also why Prabhupada emphasizes association of devotees in the purport. Because the devotees are the ones who can understand. They're the ones who can convey the knowledge appropriately. And as we'll see later on, that also helps, that association of devotees helps to remove our envy. We see how happy they are in devotional service. We feel the difference it makes in their lives. So the association of devotees is which removes that envy and plants the seed of faith. So Prabhupada emphasizes in the purport how we should understand the science of Krishna in the association of devotees. We should hear the commentaries of Bhagavad Gita made by devotees. So even if those are very intelligent, people are very intelligent, they can't grasp it because they don't want to, and Krishna doesn't force them. He respects their free will. So for us, right, in order to understand it, we have to at least begin to make some progress and be willing to accept that there is a supreme person who happens to be our well-wishing friend that we've already found out, and that we are, by comparison, not very significant. And at least think that might be okay. So the next feature of this is called Jnanam and Vijnana, or knowledge and realization. And Prabhupada says in the purport, now this first verse has specific significance. The words idam jnanam, this knowledge, refer to pure devotional service, which consists of 9 different activities, hearing, chanting, remembering, serving, worshiping, praying, obeying, maintaining friendship, and surrendering everything. By the practice of these 9 elements of devotional service, one is elevated to spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness. When one's heart is thus cleared of material contamination, one can understand this science of Krishna. So the jnanam and vijnanam first is the first thing is that jnana in this case, or knowledge, in the context of this verse. We talked before about the phenomenal and numinous in chapter 7. In the context of this verse, is this is the knowledge means you understand how to practice bhakti. There's a practice involved. We talked about this a lot in the Nectar of Instruction, where we practice things that in our heart of hearts, we are all, our essence, we're devotees of the Lord. And so we take up actions that devotees who have real love for the Lord do. And it's not just an imitation, because actually it's trying to connect us with our real selves. So it says the practice, if we're realizing that this is trying to awaken what we do naturally, it connects us deeply with ourselves. And so it starts out with a practice. And it says, and Prabhupada says, simply to understand a living entity is not material is not sufficient. That may be the beginning of spiritual realization, but one should recognize the difference between activities of the body and the spiritual activities of one who understands that he is not the body. So we heard so much in the first 6 chapters about trying to realize ourselves as a soul. And we heard various descriptions of what that means to be a soul. But here we're going to go deeper. We heard how we're consciousness, how we're changeless and eternal, we're self-satisfied, so many different things. But here Prabhupada says that there's spiritual activities for one who understands that he is not the body. So we're going to understand that at our essence, we are servants and lovers of God. We have bhakti, we have this devotion. That's our essential nature. And so if we come to the platform of understanding that we're eternal spiritual entities, changeless and self-satisfied and such, that's a preliminary understanding. But then through the practice of bhakti, one begins to connect more deeply with one's actual nature. One can go deeper. And that's what the practice of bhakti is trying to get, is to get us to reach deeper into our own identity. And deeper than that's talked about in the first 6 chapters. Prabhupada, so the vijnana, the realized knowledge in the context of this verse, refers to the results of the practice of bhakti. According to Lord Chaitanya, says, bhakti is our true identity, which is awakened by the practice of bhakti. Ultimately, bhakti leads to direct experience of Krishna. So through the practice, you practice, but the things we're doing, Prabhupada mentions the different processes of devotional service, the things we do as a bhakti practice, these are the things that come naturally to someone whose bhakti is alive and not dormant like ours. You're going to act like somebody who has bhakti, realizing it's not just the action that's going to do it, but you have to realize, have some faith that this is connecting you with your real self. We talked about that situation in the Nectar of Instruction of niyamagraha, where if you want to awaken bhakti, you should follow the things that work. There's a kind of a system that's been set up. Well, it's a timeless system. We don't know where it ever began, but there's bhakti has a certain characteristic. It's a certain thing, and it's well understood, and it's always been that way. So it's a known quantity, and so if you know what it looks like, and this has been handed down through practitioners since before recorded history, then you follow that particular path. And it says, if you neglect to do that, well, how are you going to make it happen? How are you going to awaken your bhakti if you don't make use of the collective wisdom of practitioners through so many, many, many years? And and it's not just their invention; it's something that connects deeply. That's what bhakti looks like. That's what it is. But by doing that, but he says it's not enough just to do those things. So you have to do them. But if you do them without a notion of trying to make spiritual advancement, if you think that just doing them is an end in itself, then it says, that's not going to help you much either. So one has to perform, I think it was tat karma pravartana, the different actions of devotional service, of bhakti. And by doing that, realizing that it's what we would be doing if our bhakti was alive, if we were in touch with our deeper selves. So we're trying then, as we do them, to connect with our deeper selves. So we do it with attention, we do it with a certain purpose and a certain prayer almost. We do it prayerfully. That it will help us to actually awaken what's already within us. Bhakti isn't something that Prabhupada sometimes calls it, says an artificial imposition on the soul. It's not something we're trying to attain. It's something we already are, but we're just not, it's dormant. So Prabhupada sometimes uses the example when we get to Nectar of Devotion, we'll hear he says that when a young child tries to walk, they have to practice and they fall down and have difficulties. But it's expected that they will be able to do it through their practice because it's an ability that's innate. It's natural for them to be able to walk. It just takes a little bit of practice. So he gives that type of analogy that this is something that we naturally do, but we've forgotten it. Through the practice, we begin to connect with that and awaken that. So that's the realization part. That's the realization part. We'll talk more about that, and some of these categories overlap a little bit. So first we practice, and then the bhakti can flow on its own. We talked about different stages of bhakti when we went with the Nectar of Instruction. And we'll do more detail when we reach in the last book, the Nectar of Devotion. We'll get back to this. And then Krishna says it's moksha se ashubhat. It liberates one from all kind of misfortune. And Prabhupada says in his purport, he says, one who is situated in the most confidential knowledge of Krishna is naturally transcendental. He therefore has no material pangs, although he is in the material world. In the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, it is said that although one who has a sincere desire to render loving service to the Supreme Lord is situated in the conditional state of material existence, he is to be considered liberated. And we saw in the past chapters how those who realize themselves as a soul become transformed. They become free from material desires. They begin to experience the wholeness, the self-satisfaction. They begin to realize that they are not a part, actually, of this material world. They're just simply observing. And so that fullness and that happiness that they're discovering within means that there's no need now for things. We talked about the kama, the power of desire, because we feel empty. We feel like we need to attain something. We need this, we need that, otherwise we're not going to be happy. But when there's already happiness that's there, that's ours, that doesn't go away, then suddenly, well, what do you need? You're satisfied. And they're also unaffected by what for others would be causes of happiness and distress. And Krishna said that those people are eligible for liberation, if you remember chapter 2, text 15. So here Prabhupada is saying a very similar thing. That when one starts to become advanced in bhakti, one becomes liberated. So devotees are able to realize the soul even more deeply and experience the bliss of service than the people were talked about in chapter 2. And even the beginning practitioner begins to see progress in this regard. So even if when you take up the practice of bhakti, there's a feeling of joy that happens, even in the very beginning, that begins to change your life. And it may not be as constant and steady as those who are truly liberated, but it shows you the way. You see that there is something more to life than you've ever thought before. And we'll talk about that here more in chapter 2, the verse 2, because there's a more description of how bhakti is realized directly. There's an experience of bhakti. So those are the different things discussed in the first verse about bhakti. And here in the verse 2, this knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of religion. It is everlasting, and it is joyfully performed. So again, there's a series of descriptive terms here, and we'll look at them. And so there's the Raja Vidya, king of education or king of knowledge, and Raja Guhyam, the king of confidential knowledge, the king of secrets. It's Pavitram Idam Uttamam. So Pavitra means the purest, and Uttamam is also the best, the most pure. Prabhupada gives a special translation of Uttamam here, which we'll see in his purport. He says transcendental because he says Tamam means darkness, and Uttamam means beyond the darkness. So he gives a little bit, adds a little another dimension to it and clarification actually. But just on its face, it just means the most pure. And Prabhupada means that's most purifying. So it has the ability to purify us to the maximum degree. And it's understood, it's pratyaksha, by direct experience, avagamam, understood. So we talked about that goes back to the vijnana, realized. That there's actually, there's the practice, that's knowledge, that we know how to do it. Through the practice, it has this effect upon us in actually awakening the depths of the soul. And that we can feel as it happens, that we can experience as it happens. And it's dharmyam. He says in the word for word, the principle of religion, but in his smooth translation, he says it's the perfection of religion. So that's the implication here. We talked about dharma before. Krishna was telling Arjuna that he should do his dharma and fight. But there's the highest dharma. Prabhupada actually mentioned it in one of the purports in chapter 2. That there's this eternal dharma. He calls it Sanatan Dharma. So it's the highest dharma, perfection of religion. It's susukam kartam, happy to execute or happily performed, Prabhupada says. And it's avyayam, everlasting. So it has these characteristics. And Prabhupada explains them. Here's the Raja Vidya Raja Guhyam in the purport. The purports here are quite extensive, and so we had to actually quote from them extensively because they're really intense and informative, particularly informative. And Prabhupada says here in the purport to the second verse, in the Bhagavad Gita, especially from the second chapter on, stresses the importance of the soul. In the very beginning, the Lord says that this body is perishable and that the soul is not perishable. And he quotes from the second chapter, Antavanta ime deha nityashokta shariranaha. And Prabhupada says that is a confidential part of knowledge. Simply knowing that the spirit soul is different from this body and that its nature is immutable, indestructible, and eternal. He says, but that gives no positive information about the soul. Prabhupada says, sometimes people are under the impression that the soul is different from the body, and that when the body is finished, or one is liberated from the body, the soul remains in a void and becomes impersonal. But actually, that is not the fact. And then he gives an interesting argument. He says, how can the soul, which is so active within this body, be inactive after being liberated from the body? He makes that argument. He says that while the soul is connected with the body is moving. And then when the soul is gone, the body doesn't move anymore. So the soul is active. He says it's a sign that it's active. So he says, why would it not be active when removed from the body? He says, it is always active. If it is eternal, then it is eternally active, he says, and its activities in the spiritual kingdom are the most confidential part of spiritual knowledge. So he's saying again, the real essence of ourselves, the deep nature of the soul. So Krishna only gives a general understanding of the soul in the earlier chapters. And now he's showing what the soul's eternal nature is. When you take the soul, especially away from matter, what will it be? And even when it's still within the material realm, if the bhakti is fully developed, it will be active in certain ways. So before he was giving general information, like he said, not perishable, not changeable, eternal, all these things. He gave before, its consciousness. Okay. But it has its own deeper nature that's revealed. Well, that is bhakti. Bhakti reveals it, and it reveals that its nature is bhakti. So that's why this is the most confidential and the king of all knowledge. And pavitram idam uttamam. He says in the purport, for those who are engaged in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all sinful reactions, whether fructified in the stock or in the form of a seed, gradually vanish. Therefore, the purifying potency of devotional service is very strong, and it is called pavitram uttamam, the purest. Uttama means transcendental. Tamas means this material world or darkness, and uttama means that which is transcendental to material activity. So there he gives both kind of translations. He says that something is the purest. That's the kind of the literal translation of pavitram uttamam. But here he says it also means that it's beyond all darkness. Krishna has already talked about how he wants us to leave this material realm. We talked about that so much in the last chapter, and to go to the spiritual realm. So the activities, the soul's real nature is what one does in the spiritual realm. That's bhakti. Bhakti is what happens when you leave. Krishna hadn't said a whole lot about that. But he's talked so much about getting out of material nature, getting out of the temporary world and into the permanent world. And what do we do there? We have bhakti. So we're connecting with our eternal nature. So he says what bhakti is trying to do is to connect us with our identity that exists beyond this world. So it's beyond all the darkness, transcendental to material activities, he says. Even it says when it's performed within the world, it's the same sort of activity that's there. And then it's also we can also mention that it removes all of the envy of the Lord, which allows us to realize our true identity. Impersonal liberation, Prabhupada talks a little bit about this, can free one from sins, but does not awaken devotion. So even somebody who's practicing jnana and can reach liberation, be out of the material world, if they haven't connected with their deeper selves, where they know that they have bhakti for the Lord, then they do what they don't realize their full nature, and they just kind of remain in the great white light, and they're floating for some time. Because still there's a little bit of this envy remaining, that they don't want to be inferior and have somebody else be superior. They don't understand yet that that's a situation that's actually very, very blissful for everybody. That the Lord may be the absolute and the most powerful, but he also is the most loving and caring. And he has great love for us. So it actually is the fear that we may have of being small and weak in comparison to somebody else is not well founded when it's applied to Krishna. Then it's pratyaksha avagamam, experience through direct experience. Prabhupada said, it is said that the execution of devotional service is so perfect that one can perceive the results directly. This direct result is actually perceived, and we have practical experience that any person who is chanting the holy names of Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, in the course of chanting without offenses, feels some transcendental pleasure, and very quickly becomes purified of all material contamination. So Prabhupada says about that. You try it, and you will feel how it's changing you. So it's direct experience. This is, again, part of the Vijnanam. And I comment that the nectar of devotion, which we'll do after Bhagavad Gita, explains that the purification that Prabhupada is talking about happens by a recognized progression of stages, and each step has very distinctive characteristics. And we talked about this also a bit in the Nectar of Instruction, how bhakti develops step by step. And there's certain signs that it's working. And what happens first, what happens second, third, fourth, fifth. There's a pretty standard progression that happens. And so that's that, and those things you can observe and experience. You can observe a lot of them in others, and you can experience them yourself in yourself. That's going to help us with the faith problem that we're going to talk about in text 3. And then dharmyam. Prabhupada says the highest goal of all religion is devotional service. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, Savai Pungsam Paro Dharmo Yato Bhaktir Hoksajay. He just quotes from the Srimad Bhagavatam that the highest dharma is bhakti towards Krishna, or the transcendence. And so maybe a further explanation is that Prabhupada has explained in other places that dharma means the essence of something. And he says that light and heat are the dharma of fire. You can't think of them without it. They're essential characteristics. That's what it is. And so bhakti is the essence or dharma of the soul. There are other dharmas, like we had Krishna told Arjuna that being a warrior he should fight. Doing his dharma as a kshatriya, he should fight. So there's other dharmas, but they're related to not the soul, but the external, our body and mind and understanding. We have a certain personality that is not our soul's personality. We're born with a personality because the soul goes from body to body, and there's also, it's called the subtle body, the mind, the understanding, our sense of self, ahankara, manas, buddhi, and ahankara. And so we have many impressions that are kind of stored in that subtle body. desires that we've had in the past, traumas that we've had in the past, other sorts of things. So when we're born, we exhibit that. Even when we're very young, we can see a person has a certain personality and get some insight into that. Even though they're very, very young babies, people have different personalities. But these don't relate to us as a soul because we're so absorbed in these externals that we've forgotten our own selves. So there's dharmas that are suitable to those identities. And those are temporary dharmas. So if Arjuna, as a warrior, follows his particular rules, then he can gradually make spiritual progress. But Prabhupada distinguishes between all those other dharmas, and he calls Sanatan Dharma, or eternal dharma, that relates to our essence as a soul. So we talk about dharma as the essence of something, our own essence, so below everything else. We're bhaktas, we're servants of the Lord. We have devotion. That's who we are. Lord Chaitanya gives that definition, that the jivas, their actual form is of devotees of Krishna. And so the highest dharma relates to our own essence. So that's why it's different, of a different category than any other type of dharma. That's why it's the best. And that's why he says it's eternal, because that's eternally who we are. Then it says it's susukam kartam, easily performed or joyfully performed. And in Prabhupada says the process of devotional service is a very happy one. Susukam. Why? Devotional service consists of Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, hearing. It means hearing and chanting about the Lord. So one can simply hear the chanting of the glories of the Lord, or can attend philosophical lectures on transcendental knowledge given by authorized acharyas. Simply by sitting one can learn. Then one can eat the remnants of the food offered to God, nice, palatable dishes. Okay. And this is in line with what Baladev Vidyabhushan and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur say. They contrast the relative ease of practicing bhakti. Prabhupada says one simply by sitting and listening, or singing and dancing, or chanting, or eating. Here it says eating prasadam, taking prasadam. Food that's been offered, then one actually can grow in one's devotion. We saw how difficult the yoga ladder was, especially when it gets to the higher. First of all, just acting without even the karma yoga without desires. And we're so used to acting for a particular purpose. So Arjuna is supposed to go out there and fight for the sake of fighting, not worried about victory or defeat, loss or gain, fame or infamy, just do it. That's hard to do. Even that's hard to do. We're usually, that's why his whole problem at the beginning was, I have no motivation to do this. Usually we have motivation. So there was nothing to motivate him to do it. In fact, there were things that were inhibiting him to do it. This isn't nice. I don't want this to happen. And Krishna tells him, don't worry about any of that. Don't worry about what you want. Tolerate the both the happiness and the distress, but do what you're supposed to do. That's hard enough. And then when we start to get to the level of jnana, where that develops further, where then and to the level of meditation, where you have to withdraw your attention from all of your senses and your mind. Prabhupada said it takes celibacy, it takes all this discipline to go. Krishna gave the whole thing how you go to a secluded place and try to practice this meditation. It's very, very difficult. And Prabhupada made a lot about where Arjuna says, I don't think I can do this. I can't control the mind like that. So in contrast to what has to happen with other forms of spiritual realization, which don't produce as wonderful a result, bhakti is comparatively easy. Anybody can do it. the high level of prerequisites for the other ones. And bhakti not so much. So therefore, susukam. Again, we're relying upon the kindness, the kindness and the friend. Krishna says, we already heard him say twice, he's our well-wishing friend. That's already the case. It's not that we perform bhakti and he becomes that. He already is that. And so when we show some interest in reviving our relationship, he reacts. And we'll hear about this again and again in more detail as we go along. And then avyayam, everlasting. Well, I think we already kind of approached why that would be the case. And Prabhupada says in the purport, he says, it is said here that this devotional service is eternally existing. It is not as the Mayavadi philosophers claim. Although they sometimes take to so-called devotional service, their idea is that as long as they are not liberated, they will continue their devotional service. But at the end, when they become liberated, they will become one with God. And then he says, and he contrasts that, he says, in contrast, is, as will be seen in Bhagavad Gita, actual devotional service begins after liberation. After one is liberated, when one is situated in the Brahman position, Brahmabhuta, one's devotional service begins. Sama sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labate pram. He's quoting from later on in the Bhagavad Gita. So he says that other people may think that bhakti is just a means for liberation, and then when the soul is out of the body, there is no activity anymore. It simply it doesn't have a deeper identity. Prabhupada says that actually, real bhakti, he says, actual devotional service begins after liberation. So what happens is the practice of bhakti leads to liberation, at which point the bhakti is no longer a practice, but it's the real thing. It's the practice is connecting you with your own deep nature. And when that comes out, then it's no longer a practice. Practice makes perfect, as they say. It says there's sadhana, practice, and sadhya, perfection. The goal of that practice. So you don't practice, it flows from your heart naturally as your own essence. And so therefore the soul is eternal, the soul's deep nature is eternal. And so bhakti is something that we may take up the practice, we may be practicing now, but when it's effective, it'll be connecting us with our eternal nature. So it's not something that's done for a certain period of time and then outlives its usefulness. It's not a means to an end, but it's the end. It's both. The practice is a kind of bhakti, so that's a means, and the end is more bhakti. So the third verse. Now here we're going to get the understanding of. It's really, I think it's the only prerequisite as far as I can understand. And it says, those who are unfaithful in this devotional service, it's ashradadanaha, don't have shraddha or faith, cannot attain me, O conqueror of enemies. He's talking to Arjuna. Therefore they return to the path of birth and death in this material world. So in the purport, Prabhupada taught so much about faith. In the Nectar of Instruction, we talked about it. We called it confidence there. It's a very similar thing. And so this is the faith is at least the primary. I can't really understand what other qualification there is. So that's how it begins. That through the association of devotees, one gets some faith in the process. We talked about when we talked about confidence, nishchaya in Nectar of Instruction, we said there's like two kind of main components, and one is that it's something that is of extreme or primary value, and that it's something that's attainable. So if you have those two components, if you have something that's valuable and it's attainable, then it produces this enthusiasm. If only one of the two things are present, that doesn't happen. You have something that's not desirable but attainable, doesn't excite you, and something that's valuable but unattainable, same thing. So if the two things are there, it's both valuable, and what to speak of supremely valuable, and also doable, then automatically there's some, let's just do it. Go ahead, let's do it. So Prabhupada says, the faithless cannot accomplish this process of devotional service. That is the purport of this verse. Faith is created by association with devotees. Unfortunate people, even after hearing all the evidence of Vedic literature from great personalities, still have no faith in God. They are hesitant and cannot stay fixed in the devotional service of the Lord. Thus, faith is a most important factor for progress in Krishna consciousness. That's what he says in the purport. And then he gives a definition of faith. A couple of them, really. He says in the Chaitanya, and this one should be familiar from the purport of text 241. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is said that faith is the complete conviction that simply by serving the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, one can achieve all perfection. That is called real faith, and that's the same definition he gave in 241. And then he also quotes the Srimad Bhagavatam. He says, as stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam, by giving water to the root of a tree, one satisfies its branches, twigs, and leaves, and by supplying food to the stomach, one satisfies all the senses of the body. Similarly, by engaging in the transcendental service of the Supreme Lord, one automatically satisfies all the demigods and all other living entities. Prabhupada says, therefore, after reading Bhagavad Gita, one should promptly come to the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita. One should give up all other engagements and adopt the service of the Supreme Lord, Krishna, the personality of Godhead. If one is convinced of this philosophy of life, that is faith. And then he points out that faith can develop. And he would mention sometimes that even if somebody just came to one of his classes, was willing to spend their time, that was some level of faith, a beginning level of faith. Even if they were just curious that maybe this has some value, had some little shred of faith. So it's something that can starts oftentimes very small, and through the practice grows. Also especially through the fact that there's that vijnanam or that pratyaksha where we realize the progress. Certain things are predicted, they happen, and the faith is increased. So Prabhupada says, as far as the development of faith is concerned, one who is well versed in the literatures of devotional service and has attained the stage of firm faith is called a first-class person in Krishna consciousness. We mentioned this also in Nectar of Instruction. We talked about these three types of adhikaris. And that's what Prabhupada is talking about, the first-class person, the second-class person, the third-class person. And in the second class, there are those who are not very advanced in understanding the devotional scriptures, but who automatically have firm faith that Krishna Bhakti, or service to Krishna, is the best course, and so in good faith have taken it up. Thus they are superior to the third class, who have neither perfect knowledge of the scriptures nor good faith, but by association and simplicity they are trying to follow. So some faith is there. So they've associated with other devotees. They're trying to do it. Their faith may not run very deep, but through the practice they can go from one to the other. So Nectar of Instruction, we discussed those three classes. Prabhupada, in there they're called different types of adhikaris. And adhikar means qualification. So persons with higher faith, the stronger the faith, the stronger the enthusiasm, the stronger the commitment. It's a higher qualification. So if the faith is kind of weak, then the bhakti is a little weak. That's how it is. but what happens, of course, is that even if the faith is not so strong, if the practice happens and the pratyakshagamam, pratyakshavāgamam, that direct realization starts to kick in, Prabhupada, so you feel the transformation, then the faith begins to deepen. And then, of course, the practice will gain more enthusiasm. So it's something that can build. It's faith is a motivating factor and a qualification for bhakti. If you don't have some faith, why would you even do it? Even if it's a very slight one, you have to have something that makes you think this might be worthwhile, even just to try it. And it also is a result of the practice. And so in the best of circumstances, it's an upward spiral. The faith gives enthusiasm for bhakti, the practice reinforces the faith, which makes the bhakti more enthusiastic, and so on. So what we're going to reach now in the next several verses is Krishna is going to give us a basis for that faith. A certain understanding that's going to help us to have confidence that what Prabhupada said previously, that by worshiping Krishna everything is accomplished and nothing else is necessary for our success in life, especially in our spiritual life. So the next verses are supposed to help to produce or to increase if we have faith now, it'll increase it. If we don't have any faith, it's supposed to help us have faith instilled in us. So next we have text number 4, and it says, "By me in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them." The word here is matstani and avastataha. And another take on that, and maybe even a little bit easier to understand, it means resting on me, standing, situated. Here, Prabhupada says vasta, situated, in his word-for-word translation. In the smooth translation, he says, "I'm not in them. I'm not situated in them." Yeah, okay. But that matstani and avasta can mean kind of, situated on. So he says, the entire universe, he talked already in chapter 7 how everything rests upon him like pearls on a thread. So everything that's existing is Krishna's energy, and it's all, and he's supporting everything. So in that sense, he says everything else is in him, but he's apart from that. We talked a lot about this in the Ishopanishad. If you've gone through that section of the Bhakti Shastri class, then this will be very clear. So Prabhupada says in the purport, he says, this is indicated here by the word avyakta murtina, unmanifest form. But actually, although we cannot see him, everything is resting in him. As we have discussed in the 7th chapter, the entire material cosmic manifestation is only a combination of his two different energies, the superior spiritual energy and the inferior material energy. Just as the sunshine is spread all over the universe, the energy of the Lord is spread all over the creation, and everything is resting in that energy. And then he says, yet one should not conclude that because he is spread all over, he has lost his personal existence. To refute such an argument, the Lord says, I am everywhere and everything is in me, but still I am aloof. So in the Isha Upanishad, we talked about that. We even had that example of if you take a drop of ink and drop it into a beaker full of water, the water becomes the color of the ink, but the drop has disappeared. And so when Krishna expands himself, in Isha Upanishad it talked about the complete whole from whom everything, all the other complete wholes are emanating, but who remains complete despite that. So if you can imagine a drop of ink, and maybe not just into a beaker of water, but into a big lake or the ocean, and it colors the whole ocean, the color of the ink, but the drop still remains intact. So the Lord, there's this connection. Everything is connected to the Lord. It's Krishna's energy, and he sustains it. It's part of his existence, his expanded existence. It cannot exist without him. But even though it's an expansion of him, he is not reduced in any way by that. He's not even lost any potential energy. You could take it all away. He can create it again. He can create 100 of them if he wants, the whole universes or whole systems of universes, and not have have his power or potential power diminished at all. And that's his unique situation. He's trying to explain that here. That there's Krishna, the form, the source of everything, that's always completely whole, never diminished, and everything else is an expansion of him, so all connected with him. Space, time, everything. He's not an entity like any other. This is going to give us faith, right? That if we surrender to him, who's the source, the controller, the basis of existence of everything else, that we've gone to the right place. There isn't anyone else or any other thing that we could approach that could accomplish something different or more. That if we go to the source of everything, that's just the best bet we can have. And Krishna will explain, if you take up any other path, if you take any other kind of, have faith in anything else, that's also just faith in a part of me. So why not just come to me directly? That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to give us that faith that if I just, as he says, surrender unto me at the end, if I just worship him, then there's nothing else to do. And so in 9:5, he says, and yet everything that is created does not rest in me. First he said it rests in him. He says, and then yet everything that is created does not rest in me. Behold my mystic opulence. Yogam Aishvaram, his mystic yoga power. Although I am the maintainer of all living entities, and although I am everywhere, I am not a part of this cosmic manifestation, for myself is the very source of creation. That's what he says. And Prabhupada explains that. He gives an interesting example. He says, sometimes we see a picture of Atlas holding the globe on his shoulders. He seems to be very tired, holding this great earthly planet. Such an image should not be entertained in connection with Krishna's upholding this created universe. He says that although everything is resting on him, he is aloof. The planetary systems are floating in space, and this space is the energy of the Supreme Lord. But he is different from space. He is differently situated. So he effortlessly does everything. That's why we mentioned in Isha Upanishad that when he creates all these universes, they're called complete wholes. Because it's got so many, it says so many universes are there. But he's unlike Atlas, he's not straining. He's not having to concentrate very intently on controlling them. Without effort, he's able to control them without effort. He's that powerful, he's that omnipotent, that it doesn't take any of his attention, it doesn't take any of his strength. He's not preoccupied with it. He's not intently watching things and trying hard to keep them under control. It's effortless. So he can create as much as he wants, and we see pictures of Krishna. He's playing his flute, he's herding the cows, he's dancing, relaxed. It's not a burden to him at all. So he says all these things are resting on him, but it doesn't bother him in one bit. So what we have here is an explanation. We call it in our tradition. Lord Chaitanya has introduced this Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva philosophy of you can't think of things as being one, and you can't think of them as being different. Or sometimes it's the simultaneous, inconceivable philosophy of oneness and difference. There's two kind of poles to it. There's the oneness, where everything is Krishna's energy, and it's connected with Krishna. It's resting on his existence, his power of existence. He has a potency, right, called Sat, the potency of existence. And so everything that exists is part of that. There's not a separate thing. In that sense, there's not two different things. There's only Krishna's existence. He's got his personal existence, which is complete and does everything effortlessly. And then he's got all of his other various energies, which are not as complete. They're complete in the sense that they seem to function just on their own. Krishna doesn't have to sweat it. But they're not the source of everything. They're not even the source of themselves, nor the sustenance of themselves. But they're part of Krishna. So there's in that sense, if you look at greater Krishna, there's only Krishna. But then there's Krishna, the particular form. My Guru Maharaj, he's kind of condensed what Prabhupada says a couple of places, and he says that Prabhupada essentially says that nothing is different from Krishna, because it's part of Krishna, right? But Krishna is different from everything. So there's these two polarities. There's the oneness, and then there's the uniqueness of Krishna, the difference. And they both serve an interesting purpose in our bhakti. The oneness aspect is important because it helps us to develop faith in exclusive worship of Krishna and taking him as our only shelter. And notice the definitions of faith in the purport to 9.3, that simply by serving Krishna everything is accomplished. It's like watering the root of the tree, putting food in the stomach. Right? Krishna is the central aspect of everything. The oneness aspect, makes us understand that there isn't any other. There's a verse in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam that says, fear comes from this sense of otherness. Here, Krishna is trying to show us that there's not otherness. We and everything else are energies of him. We belong to him. They're just different varieties of energies. And so if we see that oneness, then we don't fear this, we don't fear that. So it's all under the control of the Lord. And if I simply worship the Lord, everything will be fine. Otherwise, if we think, well, the Lord is powerful, but there may be other powers that can compete with him. Maybe some things aren't under control. Then there's less faith. Even if you say there's somebody who's the most powerful, but not all powerful. Krishna is all powerful. All powers are his. Everything that exists is him. There's no second thing. There's no second power. So if you have somebody who's the most powerful, there may be some things that they're not all powerful. There may be some things that can't be controlled. There may be some things that are out of bounds. But with Krishna, there's not. So that gives us the faith that simply by performing bhakti to Krishna, everything is taken care of. We don't need any other process. We don't need anything else. But the difference aspect is also important, how Krishna is, even though he's the source of everything, he's still complete. He's aloof, as Prabhupada said. That's crucial to the notion of devotion, relationship, and service. It puts a face on things. Right? If we see things as one, like there's pantheistic conceptions, like the whole existence is somehow a manifestation of the divine. That means I'm part of that and everything else. The whole creation is divine. Then it's difficult to understand what my proper place, and it produces certain conundrums. It's if the whole existence, including myself, is divine, then what is my proper place in relationship with the rest of divinity? Can there be right and wrong? Because I'm divine, everything else is divine. Who's to say? What's the appropriate way to act? What's the inappropriate way to act? What's the purpose of everything? Is there an overarching purpose? Somebody who's in the mode of goodness, a good person will say, let's try to increase harmony every place. And somebody who's a good person, that if you see, let's try to work with the environment. Let's try to help all different beings, be as happy as possible. If they see the whole world as divine, that will seem natural to them. But somebody else, maybe who's not has a different attitude, may think that, well, I'm divine. Why shouldn't I realize all of my potentials to the full capacity? Why is the whole? Why should the collective thing be the highest value? Maybe each individual component is meant to try to realize their own value to the maximum degree. Why is kind of selflessness so important? And it's hard to know, which one is right and which one is wrong. But in bhakti, everything, including ourself, is part of Krishna's energy, and everything, including ourselves, is meant for acting in harmony with him. So there's a face on it. The purpose of everything is to act in harmony with Krishna. Right is in cooperation with Krishna. He's the one who sets the purpose for everything. There is an overarching purpose. He's designed that. And we as the component parts. And all the rest of us are meant to act in harmony with Krishna. It's a much easier thing. And there's a face on it. We can, how do you have devotion to everything? It's a little bit hard. I said that the person in goodness can kind of do that and try to help all living entities and things. But with Krishna, there's an actual face for our love, a face for our devotion, a focus for that. And everything else is in context of Krishna. So also the devotees want to help all living beings because of their relationship with Krishna. We do it in the way that Krishna shows us is best. So 6, Krishna explains a little bit further. He says, understand that as the mighty wind blowing everywhere rests always in the sky, all created beings rest in me. So, because it said, how can it be? It kind of answers the question that you might ask. Well, how does it happen? He says, everything that is created does not rest in me. Behold my mystic opulences. So how is that? So Krishna gives us something to help to understand that a little bit closer. He says, understand that as the mighty wind blowing everywhere rests always in the sky, all created beings rest in me. Prabhupada says in his purport, he says, for the ordinary person, it is almost inconceivable how the huge material creation is resting in him. But the Lord is giving an example which may help us to understand. The sky may be the biggest manifestation we can conceive, and in that sky, the wind or air is the biggest manifestation in the cosmic world. The movement of air influences the movements of everything. But although the wind is great, it is still situated within the sky. The wind is not beyond the sky. So Prabhupada also mentions space is one of the energies of the Lord. So wherever there's existence, that's the Lord. That's the Lord's existence. So when he appears to be in a physical location, that's only because he desires to. He can be any place he wants. Space and time are his energies and can be manipulated as he chooses. And verse 7, O son of Kunti, At the end of the millennium, all material manifestations enter into my nature, and at the beginning of another millennium, by my potency, I create them again. This should be a little familiar from the last chapter, chapter 8. And here Prabhupada says in the purport, the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of this material cosmic manifestation are completely dependent on the supreme will of the personality of Godhead. At the end of the millennium means that at the death of Brahma. We talked about Brahma's day and night, and also the end of his life in chapter 8. There were verses 18, 19, and 20 that talked about that. At the beginning of Brahma's day, all living entities become manifest from their unmanifest state, and thereafter, when the night falls, they are merged into the unmanifest again. And then again and again, when Brahma's day arrives, all living entities come into being, and with the arrival of Brahma's night, they are helplessly annihilated. And yet there is another unmanifest nature which is eternal and is transcendental to this manifested and unmanifested matter. It is supreme and is never annihilated. When all this world is annihilated, that part remains as it is. So now we see here in this section how Krishna identifies himself as the agent for these transformations. In chapter 8 it just says these cycles are happening. That the world up to the level of the planets of the Devatas are annihilated every night of Brahma and created again. And at the end of Brahma's life, the universes are destroyed. And here he says, that's up to me. I'm doing that. I'm the agent for that. He doesn't mention that in chapter 8. But he mentioned that how the difference between liberation, where he said that my unmanifested place is eternal, and everything down here in the world is changing. The universe is created and destroyed. Now he's saying, I'm the one who creates and destroys those things. I'm the actual agent for those things. Again, he's trying to give us faith. Who else are we going to go to worship? Who else are we going to go to seek shelter from? Than somebody who controls everything. And he says in 8, the whole cosmic order is under me. Under my will, it is automatically manifested again and again, and under my will, it is annihilated at the end. And here Prabhupada says, it is clearly indicated here by the word avasham that the living entities have nothing to do with this process. The state of being in their past life and the past creation is simply manifested again, and all this is done simply by his will. This is the inconceivable potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And I looked at some of the commentaries, and Prabhupada translates this Bhuta Gramam. In this verse, says all the cosmic manifestations. Some of the other commentators say it's the aggregate living beings, and they mention how the living beings are powerless. So here in that part of the purport, it seems that Prabhupada also covers that type of translation. He says that the Lord. The living entities are appearing, but they have nothing to do with it. They're powerless, just as they say. And simply it happens just by the will of the Lord and his energy. So we're here because of the Lord's energy. And then Krishna says in 9, O Dhananjaya, all this work cannot bind me. I am ever detached from all these material activities, seated as though neutral. And Prabhupada says, and after creating different species of life, he has no connection. This is from the previous verse, because he seemed to almost jump ahead. He's anticipate in 8 he kind of anticipated text 9 at the very end of his purport. He says, and after creating different species of life, he has no connection with them. The creation takes place to accommodate the inclinations of the various living entities, and so the Lord does not become involved with it. And then in 9, he says, the Lord is always neutral in the material activities of the created world. This neutrality is mentioned here with the word udasinavat. Although he has control over every minute detail of material activities, he is sitting as if neutral. The living entities take their different forms in the various species of life according to the past deeds, and the Lord doesn't interfere with them. This is our free will here in this world. The Lord has his central purpose is served in the spiritual world. In the material world, he is here indulging us in our free will. and he provides everything. But largely he just allows us to act as we will. And of course we are under the laws of karma. What he does do is he sometimes, he said in chapter 4, he comes and reestablishes religion, destroys those who are trying to destroy religion, the Dharma and that sort of stuff, saves those who are his devotees. But even when he does that, those that he kills, it says, are given liberation, or at least relieved of all of their sins. He does them a good deed. So in that case, in one sense, he doesn't. Whenever he does seem to interfere, he does it for everybody's benefit. He doesn't play favorites. Ten, he says, this material nature. This is a verse that Prabhupada quotes a whole lot. Maya yakshena prakriti suyate sa chiracharam hetunanena kaunteya jagadviparavartate. This material nature, which is one of my energies, is working under my direction, O son of Kunti, producing all moving and non-moving beings. Under its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. And Prabhupada says, it is clearly stated here that the Supreme Lord, although aloof from all the activities of the material world, remains the Supreme Director. The Supreme Lord is the supreme will and the background of this material manifestation, but the management is being conducted by the material nature. In summary, Prabhupada says the material nature without the superintendence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot do anything. Yet the Supreme Personality is detached from all material activities. So it was even difficult to get through 10 verses today because they're so packed. But the basic idea is that Krishna gave at the beginning the definition of this pure devotional service, all the different characteristics it has, and the essence being that it gets right to our essence. There isn't anything that can compare to it. It produces results that can't be produced in any other way. That can't be. No other results can be comparable. And it takes a certain amount of faith in the process to begin it, even if it's slight, and that can grow through the practice of bhakti. That as we practice bhakti, because it connects us with the deepest part of our soul, we begin to experience the results, which increases our faith. And then Krishna gives the other verses that we talked about, showing why we should have faith in worshiping him. Everything that exists is his energy. So what else can you worship if you're going to worship anything? And if you have this personality, who's the source and controller of everything, who is inclined towards you, the Suridam, Sarvadehinam. Twice he's mentioned already that he's the well-wishing friend of everybody. We're all looking for friends. We're all looking for people that can help us, that can support us, that can protect us, or to be allied with us in some way. So why would we reject that notion of having that relationship with him? Someone so great and so wonderful. So he's trying to give us here in this last section we covered, 4 through 10, really strong foundations for our faith. Why shouldn't we take it up? Take up the practice and see if it doesn't work. All right. So next time it's going to take at least three classes to get through this chapter because it's such an essential one. And we'll cover roughly another third of it next week, and then the rest of it hopefully the following week. Actually, next week there won't be class. I'm going to be out of town, but the following week we'll pick it up. So, thank you very much.